Thank you, Venture Cafe. My name is Neferteri Strickland, and I want to welcome all of you to this session where we're planning and intending on designing to disrupt and reimagine education as we move forward. So let's start with the old proverb, give a man a fish. You give a man a fish, you feed him for a day. Teach him how to fish, and you feed him for his lifetime. If you agree, I want you to, in the chat, in solidarity, put the number 1. Let me make sure this works for everybody. Nice. Patrice, see you. Emily, beautiful. Daniel, very good. So I want to thank everybody for taking time out of their day. I'm just outside of Pennsylvania in King of Prussia. I'm a parent, a concerned parent who wants the best for my 2 school-age children. Today, if you walk away from this talk with nothing else, we'd like to communicate the importance of building early STEM career awareness, exposure opportunities, making learning more applicable to young people through applied learning, and strengthening school-community relations. I'm grateful to all the stakeholders. Venture Cafe, thank you for making this session possible. And before you meet the 2 educators who will lead this discussion, Benita Gordon and Bryan Carter, I'd like to share my STEM story. And I usually tell this story when I'm asked why I volunteer so much of my time and put forth so much as far as donation dollars into STEM education. In my school district, it's a smaller school district. Middle school starts in 5th grade. 5th grade is when the last remnants of my baby left, right? 10 and 11-year-olds are becoming big boys and big girls, expected to hold their own with 6th, 7th, and 8th graders. In 2019, my 5th grader was excited to announce that she was going to be a part of the underwater robotics team. Unfortunately, many other students wanted to be a part of that group as well. So due to an overwhelming response, the program added a second online evaluation that reduced the number of participants to the target number, leaving my daughter weeping in my arms. And this is at a time when we're telling students, if you're a female or if you're a minority, we need you in STEM. I inquired, I probed, but to no avail. Our family was left out of that experience. And that could have been her STEM story. The story that she told, that she stood at the podium as a valedictorian at MIT or some other university that has a well-resourced engineering program. For today's discussion, we identified this as the problem statement. Equity in pre-K through 12 education is not there. It's not preparing our students for higher education in 21st century careers. So I say again, pre-K through 12 education is not equitably preparing students for higher education in 21st century careers. If I said that clearly enough, if you agree, put a 1 in the chat box. If anyone disagrees, please put disagree, and we'll start that dialogue now. I see no one in disagreement. So I'd like to go ahead and introduce you to one of our 2 educators, Benita Gordon. She's an educator, edpreneur, and owner of Gordon Global Education Concierge, LLC. Benita's team coordinates all aspects of and for education nationally and internationally with a focus on coaching, consulting, and training of parents, educators, educational institutions, and community stakeholders. Ms. Gordon has been in education for over 22 years, and her experience includes teaching in schools in Florida, Virginia, Maryland, and the District of Columbia.
Thank you so much. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us. It is storming here in sunny Miami. So if you kind of see me do like this, it's thundering. That's what's happening right now. So we want to get started. Thank you, Neferteri. Thank you, Venture Cafe. And just open the dialogue. So this is what we want to discuss. Equity is the quality of being fair and impartial. We want to talk about the importance of building early STEM career awareness and exposure, applied learning, and making learning more applicable to young people, and the importance of school-community relations. Schools were not prepared. When COVID came, it came like a rushing mighty wind, we say in the South. Mm-hmm. It came swiftly, and we shifted just as fast as we could. and I had to correct a person in the store when we were trying to hurry and rush to get to the store to get toilet paper for I don't know why. We were running to get it, and she said, I'm going to homeschool my kids. I'm so excited. And I said, you are? Were you homeschooling them before COVID? And she was like, no. And I said, honey, you're not homeschooling your kids. We're doing crisis online education. We threw your children back to you.
Wow.
And said, tag, you're it. And then we tried to run back. And so throughout the country, throughout the world, even with international teachers, we are steady trying to, in the school year, some school years are just ending, adapt to new accommodations and figure out how we can come together as the village to work with parents, to make sure Neferteri's daughter, she's on the list, but how do we open it up to ensure that she's getting into the program and making it equitable? So I'm from rural Virginia. We have one stoplight, one high school, one middle school. The equity in rural Virginia compared to where I taught in Southeast DC is different. It's going to look different. But we need to make sure that all of students have access to make sure that they are ready for the 21st century. So that's what we're going to discuss today. So if you could go down, we're going to go ahead and pull up some poll questions. They are going to pop up in a few seconds. Thank goodness for technology. Thank goodness for these phones and computers. I'm not going to call out the platform because they're not paying us. If you could go ahead and answer these questions quickly on your screen. Number one, how do you best communicate with your scholars teacher? What are the ways? Oh.
Is anyone else having issues seeing the polling questions?
No.
Oh, I'm so sorry then. Sorry.
Okay. All right. Yeah, thank you. I appreciate that, Natalie. What are the ways that school-related information is communicated to you? How do you rate your school's level of communication during the response to the pandemic? And this is also for educators and community stakeholders from what you've heard in the community or what you've seen and heard on your own if you are not a parent or a guardian. If you're the auntie, the uncle, the godfather, the godmother, please answer. Do you think your scholar school did a good job effectively communicating the updates and changes during remote learning? All right, we're going to do about 60 more seconds. Myself. And 10 more seconds. I don't know about you, but I love the power of mute button. It worked so great on my Zoom meetings this year. Something I've dreamed about having all my life in middle school. And we're going to close the poll in 5 seconds. Go ahead and make sure you are looking back over it. We only have 4 quick questions. We have 68% that voted. That's great. As an educator, we always like to get at least 75%. Okay, and we're going to go ahead and close the polls. Wow. So let's look at this. Can everybody see the results? Okay, good. I see head nods. Okay, so we did a lot of emailing. I want to open that up. So I'm going to open that up to the floor. If anyone here would like to discuss how your experience was with the parents communicating with your scholars through email or via email, was it also something that you were doing previous to COVID-19, or was that something that all of a sudden your email was popping?
I can speak on that a little bit. So in our environment, we were already doing, not only emailing, but we already had relationships with families where we have facilitators as opposed to teachers. They have a certain set amount of young people and families that they work with, and they are in phone communication and text communications with families, so that when we went into COVID-19, those were relationships that were already built, and we were already doing that kind of communicating.
Wonderful, thank you. That is great. Anyone else? Okay, we're gonna roll to the next one. What are the ways that school-related information is communicated to you? So I have to be honest, Neferteri let you know that I've been teaching for 22 years. I just finished my 22nd year. I've been a middle school teacher for 17 of those 22 years. And I use Class Dojo. And when I tell people that, they laugh and they go, that's for elementary. And I go, no, 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 no. My parents love it. One, I teach in a school where 68% of my students are Hispanic. The other half of my students are Haitian, Creole, and French. And then a small percentage are English speaking, that is their native language. Class Dojo translates everything for me. So all of my parents feel easy. They feel okay. They're able to, and I do videos, so they're able to watch the videos. So were there any other ways that the school related information and communicated with any parents or guardians in here today? Okay, so we're gonna go with email was our major one. Not a problem, and I love that. That's one of the things that as an educator, I always make sure that my parents let me know what's the best way to communicate with them. I have a lot of parents that work jobs, especially when I worked in the DC metro area, government jobs, they could not take their phones in. So if there was a problem or there was a concern, I needed to email them immediately. All right, and our next question, how do you rate your school's level of communication during the response to the pandemic? We have an overwhelming 60, but that's great. But I want to talk about the 13%. Is there anyone who clicked on the 13% or the 27% with great that you could give suggestions that you wanted to say to improve, or anything that was the major issue across the board? Don't be shy.
Benita, I know for me, there was communication. It just felt as though it fell short. It did not feel as though there was an emergency response plan in place for us to respond to collectively for continuity. And I understand that this is new for everyone, but I would like to see an emergency response plan for continuity of learning. And if there are educators or administrators that are a part of the conversation here today, are you being engaged currently about that as we move forward to the fall, or as we start to look forward to the fall?
Thank you for sharing. That's important. Anyone else want to share out? So as an educator, that's one of the conversations we are having with our administrators. And one of the things that we saw just here, I'm in Miami-Dade, it varied from school to school. So if you have multiple children in different schools, you were dealing with different venues to communicate with the parents. So just in our house, we had some kids on Remind. We had some kids on Class Dojo. We had some that were just getting emails. And so it varied from space to space. So one of the things I do agree with, we're trying to just kind of streamline it and bring it in. Our last poll question is, do you think your scholar school did a good job effectively communicating the updates and changes during remote learning? And so for that one, we had acceptable 53%, great 33%, and poor and needs improvement as 13%. So I'm going to keep us going, but I want us to look at this. As we move into the post-COVID, and I say that lightly because COVID is still here. It is not going anywhere. But in terms of education, we say post-COVID because there is a pre-COVID. anything, the way we were teaching, the way we were doing attendance, the way we were giving assignments, the way we were communicating before March, some of it is null and void. We can't go back to it. It's not going to work. We are now looking forward to hybrid, alternative education. And so this is where we want the conversation to come in, because our key goals today is to make sure you walk away with questions to take to your administrators, your teachers, your school boards, your school districts, and having the verbiage to be able to ask questions and be engaged and involved. So if you could go to the chat, and if you give me a 1, if your district sent out a survey to parents and stakeholders, and a 2, if your district has not sent out a survey to parents and stakeholders. Wow, okay, so we have a 2. This is really interesting. Okay. All right. So to continue the conversation, it's important for us to have our parents' input. One of the things I tell my parents all the time is, teachers, we can complain and we can be mad all day. We can write letters, we can protest. It takes a group of parents, just literally this group of parents in our session today, to go to the school board meeting and demand the change, and it will happen. Your voice is the most powerful voice in the system of education, period. And I'm telling you, after 22 years, I know this now. I'm going to give you a prime example. I worked at a school where our AC went out. It was hot. And I don't know if you've ever been to DC. If you're in Philly, then you already know. Baltimore is hot. I am in Miami. It's a different heat, but hot is hot. We went on our 3rd day of not having AC in our class. I went out to Family Dollar. I purchased 5 fans. We are in class sweating. And I teach middle school, so you know, sweating, and I'm like this, and it's just a lot going on. We were able to, I said to my students, close my door quickly, and I said, I need you to pull your phones out. I want you to take a picture of you looking pitiful. Let some sweat drop down. Let it just look bad. Have a pencil in your hand and send that picture to your parents. Then I want you to text them this number and this email. The next morning, the AC repair people were at our school to repair the AC. After my principal, that I know, he would send the email and share it with us, of asking and begging and calling to come fix it. Parents, how we go moving forward for COVID and how we make it equitable for your child, your student, your niece, your nephew, your godson, your grandchildren, is to make sure that your voice is heard and be involved. How do you do that? Well, let's discuss it. Raise your hand or put a thumb up, or just go ahead and share out how you have already made yourself involved in the process right now. Yes, okay. Are there any questions, anyone concerned about how to become involved in the process right now? Yes, okay. No, everybody's ready? Okay, so this is what we're going to do. In order for us to be involved in the process, the first thing I need everybody to be is on social media. And you're like, really, Benita, social media? I don't have time for that. I don't want to be tweeting or TikToking or bebopping or any of that. Yes, social media. Prime example. Just yesterday, we received an email about something totally related about planners. Social media made people and companies step up in the times that we are in now. Social media is where you can go to find the information for your school. My school when we went online with Instagram. And I had to remind my students, you don't have to join the Instagram, just come to the Instagram to get all of the information. And then parents started to let us know what were the problems. once our parents were on Instagram and Twitter and they were responding and letting us know what they needed, we were able to adapt and change swiftly and quickly. The first complaint, this is too much work. But we didn't know because we're not at home with our scholars. Remember, I went from having my students for 90 minutes in class, and then I threw them back at my parents. So parents immediately let us know on Twitter and Instagram, this is too much work. They're on the computer 3 to 4 to 5 hours a day. That's not acceptable. So as a school, we went back and we revamped the assignments and how long we wanted them to stay online. And then we let the parents know. Any parents in the room, as soon as you started online instruction, you had to go back and revamp. Can you share out with us the feeling or what was said and done to quickly adjust and change? Come on, y'all have to talk to me today.
I'll talk as a parent real quick. I actually had the opposite experience with my two young people. I felt like my kids are coming out of kindergarten and second grade, and they spent my kindergartner could probably spend 5 minutes doing the work that he was assigned, and my second grader spent maybe 20 minutes a day doing work, and I felt like it wasn't challenging enough. There was no differentiation. And as I'm also an educator and I completely get what was going on and the fact that we were keeping our heads above water and trying really hard to do all the things that we were doing. But I do feel like my kids did not get what they needed. And I felt like in conversations with my neighborhood, they all felt the same as well. So we had the opposite happening out here.
Thank you so much for sharing that. And is it Patrice? Thank you so much for sharing that. And I saw several people in the chat. Someone else in the chat said, that sounds familiar. Okay, so what do we do with that conversation?
So I'll tell you what happened. It wasn't great. I am a huge proponent of project-based learning because I do believe in bringing communities together and experiencing learning through projects. I did bring that up to my son's second grade teacher, and her response to me was, I think he's been experiencing too much stress right now, and I don't want to add more onto his plate. So there was nothing done.
Wow, okay. So, yeah, and I'm so glad you started this conversation because this is where the conversation is going. So and I'm glad you told us that you were an educator also, so you completely saw.
Oh, I get it. I completely get it, and through no fault of her own. And I know she's not trying to get out of work. She's got 24 other kids she's got to worry about, and because my kids are at the top of the learning curve, they're the least of the concern, right? We're trying to fill in the holes and make sure all of our young people who struggle are getting their needs met without having to spend 5 hours online. So I completely get it. I know that my kids were able to do things because I was able to pull things out of my bag of tricks and do things, but I felt like there were other kids around me that were being shortchanged.
Yes. And so I love that. Thank you. Because we are talking about being equitable and having across the board, which is hard to do. So one of the things that we learned, we were doing that. We had our kids who were able to handle the work I gave them. I would assign it on a Sunday. Monday night, I had the work. And they were done. So as a teacher, I had to go back in and say, here are follow-up assignments that will give you extra credit. And we're going to talk about grades in a minute. And then you were able to say something that's important, which goes back to equitable processing. You were able to pull some things out of your toolkit. Daniel, yes. Oh, no.
I couldn't find the mute button, sorry. You know, I'm just thinking about, you know, I'm putting my parenthood aside, and I'm thinking about the communities that I serve and the focus of my work, which is community engagement. That's my dryer. My clothes is ready, y'all. Sorry. I'm thinking about, like, you know, is learning happening? What is the conversation about learning versus completing assignments? I'm wondering about the conversations happening in school districts about social emotional awareness and having educators build up their social emotional intelligence so that they can be serving students and families, and the importance of parents' role in understanding where to even enter that part of the conversation, or even knowing that there's a conversation to be had about that. I don't know that, I know that today we want to talk about STEM eventually, but I don't know that STEM is even in the conversation yet, to be honest. You know, I think that this is very traumatic learning, if we can call it learning right now, but it is crisis teaching. So, you know, I'm sorry, it's a mess in my head, and it's how I'm hearing it from communities as well, right? It's talking to parents of Latino students who don't speak English, yet they have to help their students with their homework, and that responsibility then passes to the older sibling to teach the younger sibling, and so they become teachers. So what kind of conversations are happening in school districts around supporting all of those things?
Okay, so Tracy and Krystal, I see your hands and I'm coming to you. I'm gonna respond, and if anybody else wants to respond to Daniel. So I can only speak about my particular school. So what we decided to do in my particular school was to lessen the load for certain students. So I teach an ESOL, inclusion, lower level intensive ELA class, which means that my students come in and they are already 2 grade levels behind in reading. So if I teach 7th grade, we're working on the 4th and 5th grade level. And that does not include, that just my regular, so that does not include my ELA or my ESOL or my SPED students yet. So I completely understand. So we had to have an honest conversation in my literacy department on how to break down lessons and how to give that to my students and the time frame. So for my particular group of students, Daniel, I get you. My students ended up, daycares were closed, so they ended up getting all of the kids, the nieces and nephews, the cousins, all dropped off in one home, and they ended up being the daycare workers. But our parents, who were essential workers, worked in the hospital, worked in the hotels, worked in the fields, still had to go to work. I had students that logged in at 1:30 in the morning to do assignments. I had students that emailed me at 2 o'clock in the morning going, I don't understand what I'm supposed to do. I had students that went to work in the fields with their parents and didn't log in. Or even though we are saying we gave them access to laptops, if I have 4 kids and 2 laptops, what's gonna happen? So the conversation, Daniel, is happening, but this is why we're having these sessions like this, to put that out there and to make everyone aware of the equity that's across the board, or the lack, of equity across the board, so that when we go to the school board, when we're speaking to our, down here, we're getting ready to do voting. We had the people on last night. I'm listening. What are you gonna do about education? That's first thing I wanna hear. What are you gonna do? I'm not even really worried about a raise right now. What are you gonna do about COVID and education? I'm gonna go to Tracy, and then I'm gonna go to Krystal.
I was actually just doing a thumbs up to Daniel's point. So I didn't necessarily have a question, but thank you.
Thank you.
You can move on.
Krystal.
There we go. I was looking for the mute button. We should all be pros at this by now. I don't even understand why I'm still lost looking for the mute button. But I didn't have a question. I just wanted to speak to Daniel's point a little bit more there and say that, you know, for me, this time, and we're a self-directed learning center, so the nature of our work is different, and it's personal, and it's one-on-one, and it's all the things that in some ways made us better prepared to transition into this, but some of the things that we noticed were necessary to be doing in this time was to transition support, not just to our young people, but to our families. So transitioning some of those conversations to be more about supporting the family and the parent, who is the one now in charge of things, to equip them and support them and answer their questions as they struggle through this. And then it gets to that one size fits all issue that I think comes up in schooling so much anyway, which is that they're not one size fits all. And if there was ever a time to recognize that and actually have the flexibility to be able to do something about it, it would be now, when we were all home. And lastly, I just wanted to hit on the point of going slow to get far. So knowing that while, sometimes in schooling, we can get so caught up in what standards are and how many things need to be done and all of that, but moving slow and just going as deeply and individualizing some of those key points for young people is, to me, that those were the opportunities that I hope. I don't know, because I'm not in schools, I'm not sure how much teachers had the flexibility to be able to do that kind of work, but I certainly would hope that if this continues, we can actually take more of those things on.
Yes.
Benita,
Yes.
I'd like to stay in that space for just a minute, because the question I have as a parent is there room for me as a parent in designing what the fall looks like? If the fall is going to be 2 days in the classroom or 3 days in the classroom, and the remainder of the week is going to be in my home, is there room for me to be a part of designing that? And that was one of the twos in the chat box that says that I have not filled out a survey. I've not seen a survey that has come through. And so what Krystal is saying in terms of that self-guided learning, that can happen under any conditions. They may not be desirable. So to Daniel's point, about that crisis situation and the social emotional deficits and just all the challenges, if there was less rigor and less of a dictatorial relationship, and we were designing this, I feel we could be successful. We could forgive not turning in an assignment as long as we could communicate to the educator that this is what my child learned, or help my child communicate this is what I have learned. And there are a number of people that are in this room that are just community members, educators, parents. Please share. What are your ideas as we move forward into the fall? What are your ideas? Just unmute and sound off.
Hi, this is David from the Science Center. I think one of the things that so I run a out of school time STEM youth program in Philadelphia. We currently work with 12 partner schools. We bring students to our center to get mentoring from scientists, engineers. But I think one of the things that would be really helpful for schools is to do some individual asset mapping of parents. And so when you have to fill out the paperwork to re-enroll your child, emergency contact forms, I think it would be very helpful for individual schools to ask, or do an assessment of like, what are the skill sets of the parents? Can some parents help to be translators for other parents? Does someone own a business? Does someone own, is someone a DJ and they have, music equipment, and then what is their level of volunteering beyond just being a chaperone for a field trip, but like, at what level would you like to volunteer? Because I think often the blanket, like, would you like to volunteer? Yes, doesn't really give you a sense of like what a parent's willingness to volunteer is. Maybe it's only, once a year for a field trip or a special field day. Maybe it is on a more regular basis. Maybe it is like doing, functioning as a virtual tutor for a small group of students on, helping with their schoolwork. But I think really creating a baseline of like, what are the skill sets of the parents in the school community, and working with the assets that are present in that school community, I think is incredibly important. And I think paired with that is if, parents who work in the business community, what are the industries represented in that business community? In different cities, it's going to be, there's different industries. In Philadelphia, we have a very large life sciences and biotech community. We do not have a big, kind of traditional tech community. We do not have a big manufacturing community, but we do have is biopharma, and we have a lot of parents who work in the biopharma industry. And are there learning opportunities related to their work? Is there an ability for their companies to participate both on a school level and then on a district level? And that can be, from an aspect of talent, that could be from an aspect of time, and that can be an aspect of treasure. That could be actually giving money to the school. But I think doing an assessment within the school community is incredibly important to establish a baseline of like what is possible. And then what is the appetite for parents to do a CPERT robotics program, or the ability to run something like that in conjunction with the teachers?
Thank you. That was a lot. I love the community asset mapping. And I want to say community, and thank you, Neferteri, for saying the word community, because it also includes, that's when we're reaching out to all the stakeholders. And I think a lot of times we forget while we're in the building to reach out to the people who may not know how to come to us. We're always going to have partnerships, and I appreciate you having a partnership with 12 schools. That's amazing. But then we also are going to have people who don't have partnerships, or they're not sure how they can partner with us. So when we're doing that mapping, we're able to see, okay, this is how it works, and this is where we need to go. Anyone else want to jump in?
Sure. How you guys doing? My name is Martin Barrett, and I'm actually with UB Tech Education. So, we work with schools in and out of school programs all across the world, the globe, actually. We're a robotics company. And Neferteri, she and I had a great conversation about a week ago. And, my passion is looking at the equity in education all across the country, the US. Daniel and David, I think, who just spoke, I think, when we take that portion of like that social emotional learning, Daniel, as you kind of alluded to, and equip, parents and the students, and how strong, because those particular developmental skills are going to transition with them and be with them throughout their entire process. I think that if the schools really kind of adapted a strong SEL program, whether it's through like something like what we're doing, we do it through robotics. So in the process, it's not about building or developing a robot, but it's about the skill sets that they're going to acquire throughout the process, because the parent, while they're home, whether it's a hybrid model or whether it's an in-school or out-of-school model, the parent is going to actually gather and acquire those same skills if they don't have them. Whether it's, how to communicate with the child better, how to troubleshoot and problem solve, because the school community is going to be much stronger and better throughout the process. I know a lot of schools that I talk to across the region, the East Coast, and up near Vermont and Maine, a lot of them haven't developed anything really. David, as you mentioned, it's almost like a back burner. And I think that, the parent community like you all have here, Benita, if you as a parent don't bring it up to the school board, I'm going to be honest, I talk to people all the time, superintendents, principals, and parents. If you don't bring it up, listen, if we think we see a gap right now with our children, I'm an empty nester. My youngest finally just graduated high school, so I got an empty nest, so I'm excited about that. But I think that you're going to have to raise your voice even stronger and higher, because I talk to principals and teachers, they want to do a robotics program. Their kids have never been exposed to it. And it's not about a robot, it's the skills in the process. It's like, a kid may say, I don't like algebra. I may not like trigonometry, but it's the process.
Right.
The process is what is important, not necessarily the subject, because the process can get them where they need to go.
And this is where I think I completely agree with you. And this is where I think that we as educators need to think more along the lines of project-based learning and utilizing the next gen science standards to be that catapult to get us into some project-based learning, because you can teach literacy through nonfiction text that you're reading about the sciences that you're talking about. You can teach the social emotional learning pieces. You're talking about empathy and gaining a whole different understanding and viewpoint. Our kids are extremely good at being consumers, but not so great at being producers. Yeah. Going back to Neferteri's comment about if you're doing something like project-based learning and you have kids that are defining what they're looking for to be able to learn and provide you with clear definitions or clear examples of what you have learned, regardless of language barriers or learning disabilities or any of those other components that we're trying to fit into this mold. I think that if we get out of our comfort zone as educators and let go of the reins just a little bit, we might be able to get people, our young people, to have all of those skills that Martin was just talking about, to be able to persevere, to think outside the box, to be these people. And then coupled with, I have all these ideas now, coupled with the idea of asset mapping and making these connections, now I'm bringing in community members to talk about the possibility of working in these fields where these kids are demonstrating their understanding. I'm going to get off my soapbox now.
Can I say one thing?
Yeah.
And that was what we did at UB Tech Education when COVID-19 hit in March, when everybody went home. Literally, I said to the team, hey, why don't we do something, give it to every parent across the country for free, some STEM initiatives. We did an at-home learning. There were kids who've never touched a robot, so they didn't have a robot in their home because they couldn't afford it. They took cardboard, they took plastic, wires, and we gave them diagrams and they started building it. And guess what happened? The parents started building it with them. Mm-hmm. So who never knew? So, it's sort of like taking that whole learning process. Our goal was to give them something that the student child can learn, but the parent can be engaged. Because I believe that when we empower that parent in that learning process, most of us as educators, are fully knowledgeable about being engaged in the process with our children. But what we're trying to do is take the parent who has no knowledge of education, who doesn't know what it looks like to be engaged, and to get them engaged in the process. Because if, like you said, Benita, if we cannot do education the same way it's done before, it is done. We have to look at it very differently. And if we don't, the handicap when it comes to the learning curve and our communities, it's going to be traumatic and tragic in 5 to 10 years from now.
I'd like to jump in if I
You're
can.
muted, darling. Daniel, go ahead.
Okay, I'll go next.
All right. Actually, you go, LeKeisha. I've already spoken up a little bit. Go for it.
Okay. Hi, everybody. I actually work with Daniel and pretty closely with Neferteri, so thank you for putting this on. I'm with TIES. I have been in education for 10 years. I actually just left the schoolhouse last year after I had my second son, but my focus has always been in special education. I worked at an alternative school. I worked at a turnaround school, Bailey STEM Magnet. We used STEM to turn that school around in 3 years. And what I would like to say from the last couple comments, I think that it's so important that we also remember, and this is why the term asset map, I think, has grabbed us all. We speak to so much of this as a deficit. When we speak of the opportunity gaps that are happening and just widening, when we think about social emotional learning, a lot of the conversations just feels like kids are going to come back with so much missing, and teachers are going to come back with, so much missing. And I really want to keep the conversation on all of the beauty and creativity that has actually come out of this. When we talk about parents and their involvement and should they be involved in design, absolutely. Not only should they currently are, because the parents have been able to see what is happening in their homes and respond. A lot of the learning, and this goes back to what Daniel said, isn't necessarily happening because it came from the school and they're responding to an assignment from the school. It's my kid is interested in French and she's been randomly on this app. My kid really loves sports, so we've been talking about geometry and X, Y, and Z. But parents are involved in the design, and I encourage all of you guys and all of us, as I'm a newer parent, to use our voices, to say, no, but here's what actually works for my kids, and to force ourselves to be a part of that design. But I think where some of us might be tired, especially some of us that are educators or that work in advocacy fields or whatever you're doing, we also are in this place where it's like, but we feel like we've been raising our voice. We do feel like we've been talking, but nobody's been listening. And is it our responsibility to, solve all these problems? Somebody else needs to pick up the slack. And I think it's really confusing to find that balance. And I think it becomes discouraging. And again, when we approach it all from a deficit mindset, not these kids literally have so much creativity, not these kids actually do have aspects of social emotional intellect. When we don't see or value those families and those kids and build that first, build whatever we do, whatever result, when we don't use that first, I don't care what we come up with, it's not going to work. And that's going to take a different level of trust. It's going to take a lot of different language. And it's definitely going to take us who do have certain positions of power within our schools or organizations or whatever to actually invite people to the table and to keep the conversation on growth, on being growth minded, and also being very aware of the good that is coming, the good that did come out of this, because we cannot approach it always from a gap standpoint. That's going to really put a lot of pressure on us, and we're going to crack under trying to solve all those problems. We've got to focus on what people are good at. And it's coming out pretty clearly to me in conversations, and I hope that we can all find a way to continue to share. And I encourage you guys who are doing cool things to continue to share. And I just wanted to put that out there. So thank you.
I love what you said, LeKeisha. There's a lot there, and we're coming up on almost 10 minutes left in the conversation. It took a little while to get the train moving, but it's moving, and I don't want it to stop. I believe that there's an opportunity to come back for a second conversation where we can identify how we can put together the different elements, connect the different dots in this chain that we're all seeing, or in this web of learning that we're all seeing, where we can identify an educator and we can identify the community partners that can put something together for them. Does that make sense?
Yes.
If you all would be interested in being a part of a second session that hacks this problem, put a 1 in the chat box for me. The ones are coming in.
Yeah.
I'm going to put a link in the chat box, and that's just a short survey, so we have some data points or some metrics coming out of this, and put your email address in there. And I'm going to talk with the team at Venture Cafe to see if we can have a mini hackathon session. And I know that David, I know that Phil, I know Benita, and everyone else on this call that is invested would be a part of that. We do have another educator. He just made it to the session that I want to introduce, and I want to invite him to be the focus of that hackathon. Bryan, are you unmuted?
No, yeah, I'm unmuted.
He's unmuted.
Yeah, I had been, I want to apologize to everybody, man, just life happened. But I had been listening to what everyone had said, and I wanted to pick some things out. So first, transferable skills is something that I focus on. So with my STEM class, I look at how they can take the lessons in the classroom, applying to at-home situations. So for example, I'm teaching my students claim evidence warrant. And I told them, I said, by the time you get out of STEM class, I want you capable of arguing with adults. So what did that consist of, right? So the students had to go about conducting research. I had them look at dates. I had them look at the About Us section. I had them look at names. I had them compare video to print resources. I had them compare a website to just doing a regular interview. I wanted the students to, one, understand that you're working now in the virtual age. Two, anything that looks real can also still be deceiving. So as an educator, I have to train your eye. I have to know when you walk out this door that you can tell me what truth is, and you can back it up with a sequence of behavior that will validate whatever point you're trying to bring to the table. Beyond that too, also, I believe I heard gamification. So when I'm a part of that generation that grew up on video games, I was exposed to Pokemon, Yu-Gi-Oh! Some of these names may sound familiar to you all. This is where I grew up. My mom clearly identified that my vocabulary would increase, my hand-eye coordination would increase, my critical thinking skills would increase, my level of creativity would increase by simply me playing a video game. And I am a testament of that theory that she had. I am a 9th grade educator. I'm an aspiring video game therapist. I study skill acquisition and suicide prevention using video games. Video games is one of the reasons why I didn't check out. So looking at this ongoing challenge that games bring, where they're educating and they're also entertaining. Like, you are purposely putting yourself through a stressful situation because you're trying to uncover this layer about yourself that you don't know. Maybe you got to get punched in the face 6 times. Like, now it's like, all right, bet I need to dip out the way when I see this thing coming. But that's what happens when you're playing a video game. You begin to learn, you begin to monitor. So now we're looking at transferable skills, and now we're looking at gamification. And then we're talking about the classroom. How can we take the therapeutic academic elements, those learned skills in the video game setting, and apply that to a real situation, apply that to an outside classroom setting? And what does that look like? So, so on top of me addressing the points, the transferable skills, gamification, the asset mapping, I really like the asset mapping because that reminds me of human-centered design. I don't know if anybody's familiar with the term, but basically when you're creating a solution, you build it around the people and the way that they communicate and the way that they receive information. So everyone in that community is better receptive to the way that you're giving out your help. It's like trying to offer help to somebody, but you have a language barrier. It's not going to work. So you assess what their needs are, and then you provide the help based on those needs. So all of that for me, that better helps me to understand essentially like students. So now we go into the classroom and we're looking at a student that has an IEP, or a student that doesn't really open up, or a student that's really loud. How do we get all of them to stay essentially together as we learn? And that's one of the things I'm still uncovering as an educator. And I'm going to hand it back over to Neff. I just want to say thank you, one, for allowing me to speak, address some of these points that I saw. I've been reading the chat box and looking at some of the things that you all have been saying. I'm very, very, very adamant that STEM, which is about problem solving. I don't want anybody to forget that STEM is about problem solving. Engineering is about creating a system of resources and times and schedules to address whatever said problem is. So me as a STEM educator, I am creating problem solvers who are using multiple systems of engineering to solve whatever issues that they are encountering in their own life. And with that, I'm getting back to you, Neff.
Thank you. I'm ready. I have listed down a few questions, actually 2 questions, to ask the educators when I return, or when we start to communicate looking forward to the next school year. I'm gonna ask, just straightforward, do you have an asset map that's accessible to me as a parent? Can I contribute to that? That would be the first. The second would be, how can I partner with you as a parent, but also as a professional that has knowledge, resources, and extended network that could benefit the school? I'd like to have a third question that I could bring to my educators. Can you all drop a good question that I could ask in the chat box?
And while you're dropping that question, as an educator, I want to remind you that one of the things I do as a teacher leader is I'm the liaison between the teachers and the administrators. And the things I've learned over the years, that when I go to my administrator and tell her, no, we are not going to do that, and I do it often because I'm that teacher, I walk in with the options. no, we do not want to use that platform because it doesn't work best for our students. But I have 5 other platforms that we already started using in class. We have some data, we have some newspaper articles, we have all of this stuff to show and prove to you that this is what we need. So as parents and community leaders, walk in there sometimes with the problem and the solution to assist the administrators, because I have to tell people sometimes administrators are administrating. And sometimes we have to walk in with the problem and the solution to offer to them. Daniel, I'm going to come to you, and then we're going to get ready to wrap up in about 3 more minutes.
Yes, I hope somebody goes after me because I've got a little bit of a bubble burster pen in my hand right now. I feel like the energy around asset mapping, and I'm just thinking about all the community members that I've had conversations with who have zero trust. And so I'm not going to give you my information. I'm not going to tell you where I work. I'm not going to tell you what I can contribute. Like, you're supposed to be helping me and my family. So that's the mindset, right? And maybe we can't even get to away from deficit thinking because our parents and guardians aren't there yet. The trust hasn't been built. So we're talking about getting information from them. We're talking about STEM. STEM isn't even the entry point to the conversation for them. I'm not saying that STEM isn't a big part of the solution. I'm just saying it's not the entry point off the bat. So I have concerns about that. And I think it should be part of the conversation because we are talking about equity in education. And not everybody has access to meaningful, relevant STEM experiences and opportunities. So what are we talking about STEM for if people don't even have access yet? I feel the robotics thing, like I can't go to a Latino mom and tell her, hey, you should believe in STEM. She doesn't even know what STEM is. She doesn't know what robotics are. She hears robotics and she's like, that's not for my family or my kids, that's expensive. So there's a lot of like barriers that have to be broken down, a lot of minds and hearts that need to be changed, and a lot of trust that needs to be earned so that we can actually advance this conversation to action. So I just want that to be part of the conversation before, I don't know, coming up with some plan.
I completely agree with you. And my experience is I grew up in just outside of Orlando. So Benita, I know the heat is a real thing, but Pennsylvania heat is very different. It's nasty. But I will say that if we can even at least start the conversation and remove the science, technology, engineering, and math from STEM, going back to what Bryan said earlier, it's about the problem solving, and you problem solve on a daily basis. And I know that a lot of the families that I've worked with teaching in Philadelphia and teaching just outside of Orlando have that fear. It's a very legitimate fear, and it is compounded in the most recent years, I think. But if we can shift the mindset that STEM isn't science, technology, engineering, and math, it's about how you attack problems and how you look at things from a different perspective. And one of the things that I learned in Florida was that my Latino friends and family members are some of the most amazing thinkers and attack problems in a different way that in my white brain don't think that way. So having conversations definitely is a great place to start, but I hear you 100% about the fear of giving anyone any information. I think we've got to shift our mindset away from the subject areas into problem solving.
Thank you, Patrice, for sharing. Daniel, thank you for your input. I absolutely value it, and I hope everyone else will take it to heart. I know that I will as well. I want to thank everyone for your time today. We just ran out of time. Benita, thank you so much for gracing us with your perspective. Bryan, thank you. Everyone that was able to attend today, I really appreciate you being that soundboard. Thank you, Venture Cafe. Yeah. Tanya, thanks for moderating this. You all have a good day.
Thank you. Bye.